Right, so we decided in the last video that because the US only takes an hour to make wheat and Mexico only takes an hour to make tomatoes, that US should make wheat and export it to Mexico, and Mexico should make tomatoes and export to the US. So suppose, for example, the US, in the absence of trade, was picking a point like this on the production possibility frontier. If they're going to have something left over to export to the Mexicans, they're going to have to start specializing in wheat. So they will move more of that 100 unit labor supply that we talked about in an earlier video. They'll move that more in the direction of producing wheat. And in the case of the Mexicans, they may have, say, chosen a point where they were producing and consuming, or it looks like about half and half in the absence of trade. And if they're going to have anything left over to give the Americans, then they're going to have to start specializing in tomatoes. So both countries move along the PPF in the direction in which they have an advantage. And in doing so, you can see that there really is no compelling reason to stop. And as long as you trust your trading partner, which we assume they do, the US would be most efficient if it simply made only wheat, and the Mexicans would be most efficient if they simply only made tomatoes. And we call this point the point of production with trade. And you can see that in both cases we have a situation that arises that is maybe slightly surprising, of complete specialization, meaning that once you have an advantage in something, in the case of Mexico it's tomatoes, you only make tomatoes. If you need wheat, you're going to have to get it from your trading partner. So we have complete specialization, which actually is a natural result of the constant cost case, because in the constant cost case, no matter how much of a good you make, you never change. The cost of producing the good never changes. So if you had an advantage in the good to start out, then you continue to have an advantage no matter how much you specialize. So this is the point of production with trade. And then once if we're the US and we've got 100 units of wheat, obviously we like to consume both things, so we are going to have to trade some of that wheat away to the Mexicans. And the way that we do that is, if you remember, we selected a feasible world price, which was 1 wheat equals 1 tomato. Just getting my 45-degree line there. Let's see if that stays. So we're going to draw something that is referred to as the trade line, which is the combinations of the two goods that are feasible when trade takes place. And that's, as you can see, means that any combination of wheat and tomatoes where you could trade up to 100 units of wheat for 100 tomatoes. You wouldn't pick that point because you probably like a little bit of everything, but theoretically all these points are feasible, and you can see why economists say that trade is beneficial, because all these points on the blue line, the trade line, lie outside of the production possibility frontier, with the exception of this point, the point of production, which obviously one would not choose to consume at. And we can draw the trade line on the Mexican diagram as well. So I'll get my ruler back. And of course the Mexicans specialize in producing tomatoes. So their point of production is here, and then at a rate of 1 for 1, which is the world price, the Mexicans can trade tomatoes for wheat. So this again is the trade line in the other diagram. And the slope of the trade line, let's talk about the absolute slope as we did for the slope of the production possibility, frontier, the slope, is equal to, well, this would be 100 in this case, so 100 over 100 is, the absolute slope is 1, which, as you probably remember, is the world price. So the nice thing about trade is that countries have access to combinations of goods that are impossible to achieve without a trading partner. So if you don't have a trading partner and you're Mexico, you have to pick a point on the PPF. So let's say they pick this point. This would be the point of production and consumption in autarky, for example. So in autarky, production always equals consumption. You have to make, you consume what you make. But in trade, you can specialize in the thing that you do best. In this case, for Mexico, it's tomatoes. You can specialize in that which you do best, and you can trade your surplus to the other country. So this is why trade can be very powerful, because it enables countries to consume outside of the PPF. The next thing I want to just briefly show you is we can look at the exports and imports. If we said that the world price was 1 wheat equals 1 tomatoes, 1 pound of tomatoes. As the US exchanges, this is the point of production. Let's say we could make it approximately equal. Let's say they decide to sell 50 pounds of wheat to the Mexicans, then in exchange they will receive, let's hope this works out. Oh, I'm cheating a little bit. This is just a sketch. But anyway, this is a point that's feasible. So we can call this consumption with trade. And I'm just making up the fact that they chose this point because we don't, as I said, we don't have a formal model of the demand side of the economy right now. But a feasible point is to consume 50 units of wheat. So you sell, these are your exports that you sell to the Mexicans. You sell them 50 units of wheat. You don't make any tomatoes yourself, but then in this case, you get all your tomatoes. You import 50 units of tomatoes from Mexico, and that's a point that was not available. So you could probably figure this out. If you didn't have a trading partner and you were consuming 50 pounds of wheat, you would only have enough labor to make 25 pounds of tomatoes. So this is why we're better off with trade. And let's see how this sketch goes here. Let's say if the Americans are importing 50 pounds of tomatoes, then the Mexicans must be exporting 50 pounds. I'm trying to get this about half and half. So these would be the exports of tomatoes coming out of Mexico. It has to match if that's the right price. If that's the correct world price that balances demand and supply, then we have to make sure that exports have to equal imports, and I'm going to have to cheat a little bit here. If this was really confusing, just send me email. Anyone's welcome to send me email at any time. All the wheat that the Mexicans consume comes from the US. So here we have 50 units of wheat coming from the US in exchange for 50 units of tomatoes coming from Mexico. And so again, you can see that consumption with trade is highly desirable. You get to have more of something, more of both actually, if you like. So you get to consume at a point that is not feasible if you have to confine yourself to making everything for yourself. So this is really the classic proof of why trade is mutually beneficial, that it's not a mercantilist world where if one person gains, the other person loses. This is a world where everyone gains from trade.